Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. So today, we're going to talk about hypocrites. Now, I have a saying, as you've probably heard me say multiple times on this channel. Calling people hypocrites does not change their behavior. Making people aware that they are hypocrites does not change their behavior. Because, to be quite honest, most people who are morally righteous don't really care about being consistent. Consistency is tough. And a lot of people don't care about that. So what brought this on was a video that was posted by a young man on Twitter. So it was of Victoria in some kind of evening gown situation where she bent over and started twerking in a bikini. And he put the caption, "WWE need to bring this back, man. Hopefully when Raw goes to Netflix, SmackDown on USA would be the family-friendly show." This thing got 2.1 million views, and he was absolutely destroyed. Specifically in the quotes, by people calling him, saying, quote, "Just go watch porn and call it a day. The women fought hard to get to where they are at today, and fought to get the respect they deserve and earned. Looking forward to something like this is weird, and it has nothing to do with liking women or finding them attractive. Seek help." And there are plenty of responses like this. Another one. "We live in a time where the women in WWE are constantly putting on better matches than the men. We're not trying to go back to mud pit matches and cat fights, big dog." Okay. "We absolutely do not need this shit back. Women can be amazing wrestlers and gorgeous, as proven in this era currently. Tiffany Stratton is a literal wrestling Barbie. I do not miss bra and panties matches or how creepy Vince was." So, here's another one. "So you basically want the women superstars to be objects and trophies for the male superstars to catcall and give dirty looks at. Won't be surprised if this incel is at cocksucker who too sad and lonely in his mother's basement to go actually outside and touch grass." The whole point of the women's revolution was to repair the image of women's wrestling because of this. We do not need this back. Ever. We don't need this back. Ever. Women's wrestling is still recovering from this shit, bro. Now, here's the reason I mention this. Because over the weekend, on Saturday, March 23rd, yes, Rhea Ripley does a stink face to Nia Jax. And it was at a house show. And everybody's opinions of sexual content in WWE absolutely changed. And some of the people who were being extremely negative when it was Victoria bending over and twerking changed their tune. Now, this has happened repeatedly, and people have continuously asked me to address this. This has happened numerous times, specifically when it comes to Rhea Ripley. Rhea Ripley is a sexy woman. She is. She's a little muscular for my taste, but, you know, she wears the short shorts. She knows that people are looking at her. She sees people post the GIFs and everything of her jiggly booty and all this kind of stuff. And it's a recurring theme that her gimmick is to be somewhat sexy because it contrasts nicely with the muscular nature of her appearance and her character. Similar to how, you know, people never post China, you know, when they talk about women who are, you know, too sexualized. It's always Sable and Tori Wilson and Kelly. Almost never any pictures of Jacqueline or China, who were both dangerous women and muscular women who could both wrestle and, you know, fit in a photo shoot. Which is what most people have been arguing is perfectly acceptable. We just had a, conversation, you and I, the other day about Ronda Rousey, where Ronda Rousey was talking about how terrible the Divas era was, completely glossing over the fact that Ronda Rousey herself did sexual photo shoots while she was in the UFC. And all the makeup and everything that she claimed was terrible about the Divas era was stuff that she did to become popular in the UFC. So why is it that people just can't admit that sex sells? That's really my question. Not even to call people hypocrites. But why can't these folks just admit that sex sells, especially female sex? The idea that these women are being forced to do things that many of them ended up doing on their own. I mean, I talked about this before, that there was all of this fiasco about people like Tori Wilson. We talked about that on this channel before too. How she felt like she was forced to do bikini stuff and bra and panty stuff, when in reality she was already a model doing those kinds of, all that kind of material. Ashley Massaro was another one. She was already a model or something. She had did like a Penthouse or a Playboy or something like that before she came to WWE. Some women continued to do the stuff even after they left. Many of them have OnlyFans accounts. You know, there's even some that people have not talked a lot about, like Mia Yim, who used to do sexy, how do you say, worked MMA. I forget what it was called, like lingerie wrestling kind of thing that she used to do. There's a lot of women who do that kind of stuff because it's easy money. Playing to the male gaze is easy money, and it gets women over. And that was actually the problem. What we were told is that they were not getting over because they were actually good at their job. They were getting over because the male gaze was getting them over. But they just would not admit that sex sells and sex works. Now we get both hoe scaring and hoe embracing from the same people. They're telling you 1 minute that just because, you know, a woman wants to be a sex worker, you cannot judge her. At the same time, if it's a woman they don't like, they have no problem calling her a whore or judging her. Now, this brings me to another subject. Ye old bra and panties matches. We know that a lot of the women from the women's revolution or evolution or whatever you want to call it, they hated bra and panties matches. And this was blamed almost exclusively on Vince Russo. The idea of the bra and panties match. And he decided he had to go on Twitter to set the record straight. He says, for the record, I never booked a bra and panties match in my career. That came after I left the WWE. For the record, I did book an evening gown match with Luna and Sable, but that was a direct descendant of the men's tuxedo match. Thank you, Fink. Well, here's the issue, is that so is the bra and panties match. The tuxedo match was you had to strip the guy to win. That's the goal. In the bra and panties match, you start out dressed, you strip her in order to win. But here's the thing. Here it is in 2024, Vince Russo is saying he did not book any bra and panties matches, that they happened after he was there in WWE, which might actually technically be true. But he took credit for the bra and panties concept back in 2016. Here's what, and this was a full-throated defense of bra and panties matches. And I don't think this was a bad argument in general. I'm going to read it all to you. It's a series of tweets. He says, quote, and this was because Sasha Banks was complaining about bra and panties matches. I'm a Sasha Banks fan, but I think she just slighted some great female athletes who performed at top levels while drawing huge ratings. The great women wrestlers before Sasha didn't book the bra and panties matches. Ed and I did to help win a war that saved the company. Here's him taking credit for bra and panties matches that now he says he never booked. What a bunch of sexist pigs. Guys can show off their bodies in short trunks, but women aren't allowed to. Somebody called Sports Illustrated. About that. You know, I know we're looking at, this was from 2016, almost 10 years ago. Sports Illustrated has absolutely tanked because of listening to people who don't think sexy women sell and make money. It's pretty ridiculous. He continues, the women were proud to show off their hard work. Unless you were there, you don't know. I was there. So he starts talking about, you know, these women who worked very hard on their bodies and they were proud to show them off, which is true, more than likely, you know. Again, many of these women, they take pictures for a living. They were in calendars, they had a DVD, they just did all kinds of stuff under the WWE banner, and some of them even before they got there and some well after they left. But the interesting bit, and I'm going to close on this, is that Again, TNA gets a ton of credit for what they did with the women, except for the beautiful people were the main stars of the product. And the beautiful people were virtually no different than any act you would see in WWE. And they were drawing huge ratings at the time for TNA. And they were the reason why the Knockouts got more TV time, because they were doing more stuff. They were wrestling longer matches, but essentially if you saw Velvet Sky and Angelina Love, you would think that they were on WWE TV. I mean, it was simply boobs out all the time. So, just they had more TV time and they draw more viewers because they were sexy women who were put in positions to wrestle. And other women came after them who, again, had huge boobs. And occasionally you had, your Daphnes or your Awesome Kongs, but there was a lot of women with huge boobs in TNA. I mean, it just was what it was. Go to Daphne Patai's book, Heterophobia. And there's some interesting bits in here that I want to read to you guys. And so for the next couple of minutes, I want you to just listen to what I'm saying here. John Stoltenberg, long-term live-in companion of Andrea Dworkin, has evidently not succeeded in overcoming the innate dualism that much feminist writing denounces as a characteristic masculinist approach. Though he believes he has rejected sexual dualism by, quote, refusing to be a man, he in fact embraces the duality of body and soul, invoking the, quote, fundamental dichotomy between manhood and selfhood. Stoltenberg's work represents a staggering disregard for biology in its claim to have reconceptualized life in such a way that manhood, defined in strictly negative terms, is accepted as inimical to selfhood, the identity he is trying to develop. Labeling men, quote, penis humans, Stoltenberg judges them to be nothing more than the product of flimsy assignment made at birth, because some humans are born with, quote, a bit of flesh that the attending physician judges to be, quote, long enough. Females, he asserts, are thereby relegated to the category of not penis. So this is a male feminist who refuses to be a man, who then says that, oh, it's all just thrown together. I've talked to you guys about this book before. This Heterophobia book by Daphne Patai came out in like the late 90s, early 2000s. This is some really early stuff. This is before it got into the mainstream that how men should behave and how men should think. So there were already guys, in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s who were quote unquote refusing to be men, but it wasn't as widespread as it is now. Compared to this stuff to what that this guy is saying, to a lot of the guys that I was reading about earlier, just go watch porn, bro. You're an incel. How dare you think women are sexy? So let's go to page 151 of Heterophobia. On this page, there's a little bit of a digging into Andrea Dworkin. And Daphne Patai writes, quote, Andrea Dworkin was adamant on this subject years later. The subject that, quote, nothing is less an instrument of ecstasy and more an instrument of oppression than the penis, which is a direct quote from Andrea Dworkin, by the way. So she says, quote, when she wrote that the men's, quote, phallic identities must be sacrificed and that no part of the, quote, male sexual model itself could survive, as she meaning Dworkin, put it, quote, for men, I suspect that this transformation begins in the place they most dread, that is, in a limp penis. I think that men will have to give up their precious erections and begin to make love as women do together. So, when you see fully grown men, adult men usually, or even teenage boys, who want to make love like women, by not having penises and, or not wanting to use their penis, or wanting to live life, sans penis. Now, we're going to go a little bit further in this book because it's so interesting. Stoltenberg, alas, this is Daphne Patai writing, is having an influence on other men. One of my email correspondents, a young professor of journalism, Robert Jansen, generously sent me several of his articles describing his transition from heterosexual to homosexual to celibate man, now exploring impotence as the ultimate response to the apparent inescapability of patriarchal sex in whatever context sex is pursued. Jansen's writing is a good distillation of the Dworkin-Stoltenberg message about heterosex. Patriarchal sex, Jansen tells us, is defined by the axiom of sex is fucking. This is why his goal is to be a traitor to his gender, as well as to his race and his class. Jensen gave up sex, quote, with other people, including people in pornography, after realizing that he could not have sex of any sort without recreating, quote, patriarchal sex. He explains, quote, I was the man, and I was in control because men naturally take control of sex. Even converting to homosexuality did not save him from this dilemma, for he found that gay sex, too, was contaminated by patriarchal values. In other words, there's just no way to escape this thing. This is what they want for young men, young boys. They want you to just be dragged, not kicking and screaming, from heterosexual to homosexual to ultimately just plain celibate. You're a pod person, consuming product, not allowed to get excited about anything without being considered a pervert, which is extreme. This guy's clearly an extreme case, right? Most guys would go from being heterosexual to just being celibate, rather than going to homosexual. But look at, again, this book was written in the late 90s, early 2000s. 20 years before anybody ever heard of transgenderism. 20 years before anybody ever heard of the male gaze or this stuff was going on already. So calling them hypocrites is not what I'm here to do. I'm here to say this is why they can't admit that sex sells. Because they have already started planting the seeds, and it started in universities. You see it all over Twitter. You see it all over Reddit. You see it all over, now you don't see that much on 4chan, but you see it all over social media in general. You see it on YouTube. You hear it in videos. You've seen, all of these, what's the word I'm looking for? Herbivore men, I guess you could say, who don't really find women all that attractive, or at least they'll lie to themselves. They'll lie to their audience and say that they don't. Oh, I don't watch porn. I don't think of women as sexual objects, yada, 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 because they want to be good boys. They want good boy points without realizing what they're saying and what they're doing. And what you're saying is what you're doing is you're transitioning yourself to a eunuch. That's why some men want to see these sorts of things to remind themselves that they're not a eunuch. That, hey, I do have sexual desires, and so do women. Nobody asks that, Randy Orton put on clothes because women might be looking at him inappropriately. He should be made to wear a shirt. Nobody cares. I don't care if Randy Orton's out there in his Speedos. It's pro wrestling. Of course they're going to be that way. So why is it all of a sudden the women have to cover up? Interesting. But again, you're not allowed to have be a sexual being. And that's very interesting. So I'm not here to call people hypocrites. We already know they're hypocrites. I'm here to say that you, as a person who did not mind the bra and panties matches and who did not mind watching, women do sexual things and them having thick butts and all this kind of stuff, all you're doing is you're telling these people you are not a eunuch. You are not rejecting your penis. You're not rejecting a vital part of yourself. You're not rejecting something that is beautiful and wonderful for yourself to appease them, while some of them are willing to do so. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.
MagMongoSlade. Best house I ever drew, daddy.